was in this environment that the Nisei, who were American citizens by birth, were growing up as grade schoolers, high schoolers, and college students before the beginning of World War II. Some Nisei grew up in city suburbs, while others lived in the inner cities, and still others grew up on country farms. Some of these areas had a lot of ethnic diversity, such as the Seattle neighborhood this Nisei woman grew up in.
Our neighborhood was pretty diversified. There was a Serbian on one end, and then a Russian family. They had twins. And then Caucasian, more like English type, and then ourselves. And then the stairs that went up. And then there was this black family. We called them colored at that time. And then there's another family, Portuguese, and they had the store across the street.
In contrast, another Nisei man recalls few ethnic groups in the Seattle neighborhood he grew up in.
The makeup was quite interesting. Close to 50% were the Sephardic people, and the rest were made up of Chinese, Japanese, and a handful of African Americans.
In Washington State's urban areas, such as Seattle and Spokane, Japanese people tended to live close to each other in sections known as Japantowns. Listen to this description of the Japantown in Spokane in the 1920s and 30s.
And there used to be sort of a Japantown, laundry, restaurant, lots of hotels, run by Japanese. We used to play. Our playground, so to speak, was Trent Alley, where we grew up.
Nisei grew up concerned with the same issues as other Depression-era Americans: games, toys, school, and friends. Listen as these Nisei remember growing up in Seattle.
We all skated on the sidewalks. The kids played games and baseball on the street corner. It was safe everywhere. It was very nice in that respect. We played hopscotch and jacks on the sidewalk in front of our homes. My friends and I, we just played in our neighborhood, played on our lawns, under the tree with our dolls. We only had one doll.
Right at the corner, there used to be 2 telephone poles, and they had lights on. We used to make our own backboards, climb up, borrow a ladder from someplace and nail up a basket, and then instead of these fancy hoops they have now, we just got a hoop from a barrel or something, and then we used that. We shoot baskets down there and play basketball, and then they had manhole covers on all 4 corners, so we'd play baseball and use those as bases.
In some urban areas, Nisei grew up with many other Japanese friends and neighbors, and there was not much mixing among Japanese and other races.
Most of my friends were all Niseis until I got to high school, and then there was a mixture, Caucasians and Niseis.
Japanese mission churches, Japanese social clubs, and Japanese language schools supported many activities for Issei and Nisei.
But we did have a lot of picnics because people from the different areas in Japan, they had clubs, There might be the 2 picnics going on at the same time at the park, different areas of the park. So the children would go and race in different ones. And then our churches would have picnics.
Like many other immigrants to America, Issei wanted their children to attend language schools to learn their native language and customs so they would not lose their heritage in America. After attending public school all day, Nisei attended Japanese language schools.
They wanted us to learn how to read and write and speak, but to me, personally, it was a chore.
We had the local Isseis teach Japanese. I guess they really had to pound it into us, but I don't regret it.
My mother used to talk to us in Japanese, and we'd reply in English. My father talked to us most of the time in English, so consequently my Japanese was rather limited.
The issue of language school for Nisei illustrates a tension in many Japanese families between traditional values and American culture. Listen as one Nesei tells about the conflict between language school and school sports as he was growing up in Seattle.
We used to have to go to Japanese school after grade school, so we didn't particularly care to go to school all day. But so when the war started in December, they had to close all the Japanese language schools down. So my brother and I were very happy about not having to go to school, Japanese school after grade school. Then when I was in high school, I turned out for organized sports at the school. It gave me more time to do that. But if I had to go to the language school, then I couldn't turn out for sports after a regular school day.
In contrast, some parents did not send their children to language school, as this Nesei woman who grew up in Seattle remembers.
We lived not even half a block from one, but my father said that we're living here in America, and so he thought that English language was enough. But part of it was, I think, the expense. It was expensive to go to school.
However, many Issei dreamed of sending their children to Japan for a traditional Japanese education. They wanted their children to retain Japanese values and traditions.
They had, in fact, envisioned that they would, as soon as I graduated from grammar school, that they would send my brother and I back to Japan for some education, like during the high school period. I really dreaded having to do that.
Nesei, who did go to school in Japan and returned to the U.S., were called Kibei. Anti-Asian immigration laws made it difficult for Kibei to return to the United States, even though they were U.S. citizens. Listen as one man remembers being kept in the jail-like immigration station in Seattle when he returned to the U.S. after his schooling in Japan.
In fact, I think I was only about 15 years old and was thrown in with 7 other adults, and it was a dangerous situation. After about the 3rd day, I wanted to get out of there. You have to put me back on a boat and send me back. This is not right. And why I was there, I don't know. Because, I had a citizenship. They go through, the Kibeis all gone through that thing, I understand.
For Nesei who were not sent to school in Japan, the transition from grade school to high school was also eye-opening, as this woman remembers from her youth in Seattle.
When we were in elementary school, it was just everyone was this one student body. We functioned that way. But as soon as we went to Garfield, high school, races segregated, and we had our own activities, we had our own organizations, we had everything kind of by ourselves because it was kind of an unwritten law.
Outside of school, Nesei continued to participate in Japanese community events. Nesei sports teams from around the Northwest traveled to cities like Seattle for basketball, baseball, and judo tournaments with other Nesei teams. These tournaments were important events for the Japanese community because it brought together Japanese from many areas of the Northwest.
The people from different areas would have their teams, and then they'll have a tournament in Seattle. And so the teams from outlying areas, well, from Spokane and from Yakima Valley, and then this team from Idaho, they would come in and they'd have the tournaments. So it was really a happy time, when all these young men and their followers would come in.
Conferences sponsored by the Japanese Christian churches also brought young Nesei together for yearly conferences. The connections made at these conferences would become valuable after the Pearl Harbor attack and the Declaration of Evacuation.
A lot of the conferences were held in Seattle. We had people from Spokane that came, and every Thanksgiving, the weekend of Thanksgiving, we used to have what we called the YPCC, which was Young People's Christian Conference. And so we knew a lot of the young people from Spokane and Yakima, Wapato.
While Japanese communities in larger cities provided their residents with activities and support groups, those Japanese in rural areas and smaller towns in Washington state were sometimes the only Asians in their areas. Unlike Nisei, who lived in areas with a larger Japanese population, Nisei living in rural and remote areas did not go to language schools, did not have Japanese social groups, and were not exposed to as much traditional Japanese culture. Listen as one Nisei woman describes growing up in Walla Walla, Washington.
There were only, at that time, 3 Japanese families. In our early years, there were people that came and gone, couples that had businesses, or they were single people. So everything that we did was with our, the Walla Walla community. I mean, there was no Japanese ethnic activities of any kind. We had a lot of acquaintances, but socially, I never went to the Caucasian people's homes we were never invited to parties, dinner. I don't know how to explain it. We just lived a very simple life, and we didn't know any different.
Another Nisei woman who grew up in Kelso, Washington, remembers that she and her friends were not concerned with physical differences, even though they all looked very different.
You don't think of yourself as being that different, even though I knew we had our differences. We had a red head, and then a real dark brown auburn hair, and then the 4 of us who ran around together. And then Edith was kind of like a dishwater blonde, and then there's me with my black hair. And we all looked different. That was different, but we just kind of all bonded together.
Though they lived in different places and experienced different childhoods, Nisei, living in cities and rural areas, were similar in their value systems. They were reminded of their obligation to family honor, a strong value in Japanese culture.
She would say to us that, don't you disgrace us. Every time we left the house, she would say that, don't bring shame on us.
And respect and honor extended beyond traditional ties to Japan. It extended to the country they called their own, the United States. In this poignant memory, one Nisei man tells about the gift his father brought from Japan for his elementary school in the 1930s.
My grandmother, when she was near her deathbed, when I was in grade school, my father went to Japan to see her, and he brought back a gift. But the only gift he brought back, not for us kids or folks, he brought back an American flag, silk. The size of the flag was like you put on the stage, and he gave it to Madrona Grade School, where our sister and I at that time were still attending.
But acts of American patriotism like this were quickly forgotten when America entered World War II in 1941. Issei and Nisei found themselves labeled as enemies and traitors. Not even citizenship had any effect on the way Nisei were treated during the war by the government and by their fellow Americans.